This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. I'm your host, Jim Cuddy. On today's show, longtime Democratic political operative Ben Palumbo says the elevator speech promoting President Obama's re-election ought to be, quote, his perseverance improved the lives of millions of Americans, close quote. Former New Hampshire Democratic Party Chairman George Bruno says his state is up in the air, but that things are looking pretty good for President Obama. And Bill Press interviews George Mitchell, former Senate Majority Leader and former Middle East negotiator. Are you tired of Tea Party Republicans and Rush Limbaugh dominating the airwaves? Do you want the facts you won't get on Fox or even on CNN? Then stay tuned. Our sponsor, 21st Century Democrats, works hard to get everyday Democrats involved in returning our party to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Sit back and listen, then stand up and fight. And follow 21st Century Democrats on Facebook for all the latest progressive news. We're glad you can join us. Longtime Washington political operative Ben Palumbo says the case for President Obama's re-election is easy. In the face of Republican opposition, he persevered in improving the lives of millions of Americans. Equal pay, student loans, saving the auto industry, reining in Wall Street, not to mention health care reform, and ending the war in Iraq. And joining us today on americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats, Ben Palumbo is a longtime Democratic Party activist. He's a former head of a Washington government relations firm. He was a top advisor to two senators, staff director of the House Democratic Caucus, and staff director of House Subcommittee on Government Activities. He also serves on multiple boards, including Catholics in Alliance for the Common Good, Catholics United, Niambani, which is an HIV/AIDS serves HIV/AIDS orphans in Kenya, and the John Mott Foundation, which provides scholarships for students in Calabria, Italy. Ben Palumbo, thanks so much for joining us today on americasdemocrats.org.
It's a pleasure.
You have been involved in progressive politics for a long time as a congressional staffer and a government relations practitioner. So we'd like to talk a little today about one issue that never seems to go away, gun control. Was President Obama a disappointment to advocates of sensible gun laws, or has he been up to this point?
Well, I don't think it's just President Obama. I think the advocates for gun control are disappointed and have been disappointed for years with the government of both parties who have been reluctant to deal with this terrible issue. I think in our previous interview, I pointed out that President Obama should be reelected for his perseverance in the face of enormous Republican opposition. My hope and wish had been that gun control could have taken a more prominent role in the president's and the Congress's effort to deal with the continuing slaughter that goes on in the United States. There are about 30,000 gun deaths a year. But when you look at the record of Republican intransigence and the fact that the NRA practically owns the Republican Party, I think that was probably a bridge too far for President Obama or any advocate of gun control to try to get to. The absolute obstinacy that is generated by the threats and money that the NRA is able to bring to the table when it comes to elections simply made the possibility of any gun control legislation passing the Congress to be impossible. When you go back and you realize that the legislation, that the law which regulated firearms, that the automatic weapons had a 10-year shelf life, let's put it that way, and that when it came up for renewal under the Bush presidency, and Bush did absolutely nothing to try to extend that, you've got an indication of the almost impossible task that presidents have of either party in strengthening gun laws. The irony is that the automatic weapons control law could not have become law except for the support that was thrown to it by the late Congressman Henry Hyde Republican Congressman Henry Hyde of Illinois, who basically said, "Enough is enough. This is crazy. We've got to have something to control these weapons." This was during the Clinton presidency, 1994. In 2004, when the sunset provision kicked in, a Republican president did nothing to do this. So this is an indication of the, as I said, of the enormity of the problem of trying to get this taken care of. And I don't fault President Obama for recognizing that it would have been impossible and focusing on other things that could be done, a number of which he succeeded in doing.
Mm-hmm. Now, in the presidential campaign this year, much was said on the Republican side about excessive government regulations. But what exactly is wrong with protecting people from workplace injury, tainted food, or unsafe cars?
Well, there's absolutely nothing wrong with it. The whole idea that there's something inherently wrong with government regulation totally ignores what one of the founding fathers, and generally considered to be the main author of the Constitution, once said, and that's James Madison, and that is, if men were angels, we wouldn't need laws. Well, men aren't angels. Women aren't angels. They are human beings, and some of them are honest and can be trusted, and some of them are dishonest and can't be trusted. And when you get into business, and you've got a businessman or woman who is conducting his or her business in an honorable, honest way, that would protect the customers or the workers from any harm, and on the other side of the city, or the other side of the state, or the other side of the country, you've got a competitor who pays no attention to that and will cut corners at the cost of the health of customers and employees. That puts enormous pressure on the honest business person to do the same thing in order to remain competitive. So the only way to equalize that are by regulations that apply to everybody to make sure that there is a level playing field for the businesses to compete in the way they should compete, and that is in the quality of the product and their own creativity in coming up with new ideas. So we have a choice here. We can do away with regulations, and we can increase the number of people who die from food poisoning. We can increase the number of miners who die in mine disasters, of workers on the job who get hurt. You can go down the list. Children who would be hurt or poisoned by toys or other products that are aimed at children that the Consumer Product Safety Commission can look at and say, this is wrong, you've got to withdraw that from the market. Or we can say we're not going to permit those things to happen. We are going to have a regulatory regime which recognizes what Madison said a couple of hundred years ago, and that is, if men were angels, we would not need laws. We need laws because men and women are not angels.
We're speaking with Ben Palumbo, longtime Democratic Party activist. He has served as top advisor to two senators, staff director of the House Democratic Caucus, staff director of House Subcommittee on Government Activities, serves on multiple boards, including Catholics and Alliance for the Common Good, Catholics United, Niambani, and the John Mott Foundation.
Ben, can I come back for a minute to gun control?
Absolutely.
Okay. Let me tell you that, in my view, the gun control issue is going to remain a terrible disappointment to those of us who want to stop the killing in the United States, unless and until a sufficient number of politicians decide to take on the National Rifle Association. I will tell you that I was involved in the re-election campaign in 1965 of Governor Richard Hughes of New Jersey. And the governor decided, against the advice of his advisors, following the shooting death of a policeman with a very large family in Essex County, New Jersey, that he was going to make gun control an issue in the campaign. And almost everybody said, oh, my God, you can't do that, taking on the NRA and so on and so forth. Well, Hughes defied them all. And in his campaign around the state, every place he went, and I happened to be in that campaign and went with him every place he went, every speech he made, he would include in that speech lines that went something like this: if I am elected governor, I am going to see to it that guns are kept out of the hands of felons, people with mental problems, drug addicts, and he would bring the house down. Inevitably, there would be a standing ovation. Hughes, that was one of the two main issues in the campaign, as it turned out. And his opponent, who was from a rural area of the state, decided that he would take the side of the NRA. Hughes won by the largest margin in the history of re-election campaigns of any governor in the history of the state. And one of the reasons was because of the overwhelming support of his position on gun control. Now, fast forward to today. You don't have anybody who's standing up and saying that. And until we get to the point where elected officials say, when in their campaigns, the logic of the NRA is false. The logic of doing something about this with stronger regulations is absolutely irrefutable, and I am going to point that out in my campaign and force my opponent to say yay or nay on things like should we ban cop killer bullets, should we stop the spread of weapons, essentially weapons of mass destruction, you might call them, and let that opponent try to defend permitting those kinds of weapons and ammunition to continue to be available as they are now. Until that happens, voters will focus on other things. Voters have to have their attention focused on this issue, and the only way for that to happen is for elected officials running for election or re-election to make that a major issue in their campaign.
Well, something else that voters are often focused on are taxes. So how should Democrats talk about taxes and make the case that they are, in fact, the price of a civilized society?
Well, it's funny you use the word civilized, because whenever I've dealt with any friends who want to complain about taxes, I quote Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr., who was a prominent Republican appointed to the Supreme Court by another prominent Republican, a guy named Teddy Roosevelt. And Holmes was famous for saying, I don't mind paying taxes, they buy civilization. So I think that's my answer to the question. And I quote a very prominent and highly respected Republican in that respect.
No, well put. Now, finally, as a board member of a progressive religious organization, referencing, of course, Catholics and Alliance for the Common Good, how can Democrats regain their historic edge among Catholic voters, especially men?
Well, I think we can go back to the earlier question about regulations. Men work, and OSHA protects the workplace, or they mine, and MSHA protects the minors, or they have families, and they don't want their children poisoned. So I think, in my view, the way to deal with the question of Catholic men is to call to their attention their responsibilities as husbands and fathers, in which they are assisted by a regulatory regime which protects them, their wives, their children, their mothers, their fathers, their nieces, their nephews, their brothers, and their sisters. And I think by hitting that home, because this is the kind of thing that gets to you personally when you make the case, you can win back a lot of those men.
Ben Palumbo, longtime Democratic Party activist, former head of a Washington government relations firm, serves on multiple boards including Catholics in Alliance for the Common Good, Catholics United, Niambani, which serves HIV/AIDS orphans in Kenya, and the John Mott Foundation, providing scholarships for students in Calabria, Italy. Ben, always great to speak with you. Thanks so much for your time with us today on americasdemocrats.org.
You're welcome, Jim. It was a pleasure.
And we look forward to speaking with you again soon. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Do you want to get involved and help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box? You can make your contribution to Democrats for America's Future and help us keep this show going and to elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. George Bruno is a veteran of New Hampshire's political wars. He says the Granite State remains a battleground and that President Obama's chances look good. But right now, we turn to Jim Hightower, America's #1 populist, for his common sense commentary.
Poor Mitt Romney. To dodge the tax payments he owes to America, the multimillionaire has for years stashed piles of his annual income in such secret offshore hideaways as Swiss bank accounts and the Cayman Islands. This has been very, very good for his personal fortune, but it's been very, very bad for his public political image. This internal conflict might explain why Romney chose Paul Ryan to be his running mate. Ryan bills himself as a big, big, big thinker, and last year he came out with a really big thought that must have touched Mitt's heart, for it offered a happy solution to Romney's tax shelter dilemma. In a magazine interview, Ryan complained about offshore shelters, not because they are tax dodges, but because they're offshore. His solution? Let's make this country a tax shelter, he bubbled. How's that for a big idea? Ryan proposes to make America as small and deceitful as the Caymans, a safe harbor where the ultra-wealthy of the world can hide their loot from public need. Yes, this still would leave Mitt a tax dodger, but by gollies, at least he'd be doing his dodging right here in the USA. This is Jim Hightower saying, with such a novel plutocratic twist on patriotism, I'd say ideas are not the only thing that Ryan is full of. In fact, the USA is already closer to Ryan's perverse vision than even he realizes. While U.S. corporations face a 35% tax rate, loopholes let them pay an average of only 13.4%, one of the developed world's lowest. Also, look at tiny Delaware. With practically zero state regulation of corporate entities, it has become the legal home of more anonymous corporations than any other place in the world. So, say Mitt and Paul, let's turn all of America into Delaware, a tax dodger's dream world. Now, wouldn't that make the founders bust their buttons in pride?
Need an antidote to the progressive blues? Want some good news about how grassroots folks are rebelling against the corporate powers and winning? Well, here's an easy-to-swallow pill for you, the Hightower Lowdown. Hightower's monthly newsletter will give you the lowdown, even as it lifts you up. It's 4 pages a month, jam-packed with facts you can use, actions you can take, and Jim's own Texas humor, all for only $15 a year. To become a lowdowner, go to hightowerlowdown.org.
This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. President Obama's chances of winning the potentially critical 4 electoral votes from New Hampshire are pretty good, says former state party chairman George Bruno. The congressional races, he says, are competitive as well. And joining us today on americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats, George Bruno is an immigration attorney, managing director of USA Group International. USA Group International offers international problem-solving and immigration representation at embassies and around the U.S., and Mr. Bruno served as U.S. Ambassador to Belize under President Bill Clinton. He's a former chair of the New Hampshire Democratic Party and member of the Democratic National Committee. Ambassador Bruno, thank you very much for joining us today on americasdemocrats.org.
Thank you. Pleasure to be talking to you.
And always nice to speak with you as well. Well, with time running down in campaign 2012, what are President Obama's chances of winning New Hampshire's 4 electoral votes again?
I think it's very much up in the air, but things are looking positive. President Obama, after the New Hampshire primary, really did not walk away from the state. He continued to build his organization in the state. He's got a very good grassroots operation going on in New Hampshire. A lot of volunteers coming into the state from all over the Northeast and around the country. Their presence is heavily felt. He's taking New Hampshire very seriously. It is a battleground state, so in contrast to Mitt Romney, he pretty much closed down his operation after the New Hampshire primary and moved on. He's only now beginning to demonstrate more of a presence and start organizing in New Hampshire.
You know, although New Hampshire has had strong Democratic and Republican members of Congress and the Senate, isn't there a new libertarian movement?
There is a libertarian movement in the state. There's also a very active Tea Party movement in New Hampshire. And so the two of them get mixed up quite a bit. I think we can safely say that the Republican Party in the state of New Hampshire right now is sort of a satellite operation of the Tea Party Libertarian coalition that dominates our state legislature. You know, we have the largest state legislature in the United States with 400 members in our lower house and 35 members in our upper house. So it's quite a large Republican majority. I think 3-1 in our House of Representatives.
We're speaking with George Bruno, Managing Director of USA Group International, former chair of the New Hampshire Democratic Party, member, of course, of the Democratic National Committee. What's the outlook for Democrats in statewide elections this year?
It's extremely competitive. We have a heavily contested Republican primary for governor, which is between two individuals, one of which was barely beaten by 2,000 votes by Kelly Ayotte, who went on to become our United States Senator. So a fellow by the name of Ovid LaMontagne is seeking the Republican nomination over a younger activist in the conservative movement in New Hampshire. And on the Democratic side, we have two former state senators, both female, running against each other. And I think it is the only race in the United States where a female will become the Democratic nominee for the governor's slot.
You know, among the other hats that you wear, you're an immigration lawyer. What has been the effect so far of the Obama administration policy allowing young people who were brought to this country as children to stay and complete their education or get a job?
Well, as you know, many people have been waiting a long time for immigration reform. In fact, 11 years ago, the senator from Illinois, Dick Durbin, introduced the DREAM Act, and it has been sitting in Congress, and it seems to get through one house or the other at any particular time, but never seems to get through both houses. And so on June 15th of this year, President Obama acted to incorporate some of the DREAM Act elements in an administrative and executive order. And frankly, since then, as an immigration attorney, our phone has been ringing off the hook from young people inquiring as to whether they qualify for this relief. Many of them do, and it really is sort of a lifeline, giving these young people hope that they can not only remain in the United States, but can become full participating members in our society. You know, they look like Americans, they think like Americans, they talk like Americans, and for all intents and purposes, they are Americans, and were brought here by their parents, and through no fault of their own, are undocumented, and they have the potential of becoming very valuable members of our community, and a lot of them already are. And so this is an opportunity to make them full participating members of our society.
You know, and some of the folks that we're talking about too wouldn't know the first thing about their home country, if you will, I mean, because they've basically spent most or their entire lives here in this country.
That's exactly right, and they would have no place to go. They would, in many cases, not even speak the language.
Right.
They would have no resources, and so it really makes a lot of sense for the president to have issued his executive order offering this type of relief. It's good. The relief is good for 2 years. If somebody came to the United States under the age of 16 and they're currently under the age of 30, they don't have a criminal record, and have graduated from high school, or are still in school, or have served in the military, they qualify for this relief.
What do you think the prospects are for comprehensive immigration reform under either a Romney administration or a second term for President Obama?
Well, I think the chances are pretty nil under the Romney administration. There seems to be a lot of division within the Republican Party. You've got part of the Republican Party that feels that that are looking at the demographics and seeing the growth of the Latino population in the United States. You've got Marco Rubio, who is a very forceful voice for doing something about comprehensive immigration reform. And then you've got Mitt Romney's own words that he doesn't favor the DREAM Act, providing relief to young undocumented persons living in the United States, and thinks that persons who are undocumented should self-deport themselves, despite the fact that most of those 11 million people living in the United States form an essential part of our economy. They staff the nursing homes. They pick the vegetables and fruits in our fields. They do the dirty work that many times that a lot of Americans don't choose to do, and so by denigrating this population and forcing them out of the United States, I think we damage our communities and we damage our economy.
Okay. George Bruno, Managing Director of USA Group International, former chair of the New Hampshire Democratic Party, member of the Democratic National Committee, former U.S. ambassador to Belize under President Bill Clinton, and of course, as we mentioned, also an immigration attorney. Ambassador Bruno, as always, thank you so much for joining us today on americasdemocrats.org. We look forward to speaking with you again soon.
Thank you very much.
This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Make your contribution to Democrats for America's Future to keep this show on the air and help elect stand-up Democrats. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. And now Bill Press and his guest, former Senator and diplomat George Mitchell.
Well, friends, we hear a lot today, and a lot of us complain today about this fact that the Congress is not accomplishing anything. And one of the reasons is we don't have leaders anymore like George Mitchell. Remember the days when Congress would get things done, when people were willing to work across the aisle. I don't think we've ever had a better majority leader in the Senate than my friend Senator George Mitchell, who joins us on the line this morning. It's been a long time since we've talked, Senator. Welcome to the program.
Thank you, Bill. I appreciate you having me on.
Well, Senator, your leadership, particularly after the Senate, on behalf of President Clinton, in the Middle East. So I'd love to get your debate on your comments on the debate Monday night when Mitt Romney said our entire policy in the Middle East is falling apart and Obama doesn't know what he's doing there.
Well, both are inaccurate, of course. First, the notion that upheaval and dispute and crisis in the Middle East is something brand new is directly contradicted by history. It's gone on for decades, centuries even. I hope we all haven't forgotten our junior high school history about the Crusades 1,000 years ago,
right,
and the fighting in the Middle East. This is a long-standing conflict, and it's going to continue. One of the silliest statements, I think, made in the campaign of many silly statements is by a top Romney advisor who said that if Governor Romney's elected president, there won't be these upheavals in the Middle East. Well, they're going to happen no matter who's president for a long time to come, as they have for a long time in the past. The real challenge is for the United States to do what we can to support and encourage the establishment of democratic governments and democratic institutions in the region, to help the moderates in the region who are engaged in a tremendous internal struggle themselves, internal to Islam, that's gone on really throughout the entire life of Islam. And we can do that in a positive and a constructive way, but we cannot substitute our decisions for theirs. The future of Egypt should be decided by Egyptians, and we should help to try to shape it in the right direction. The future of Syria will be decided by Syrians, and so on. I don't think the governor's remarks were correct in any way in his criticism of President Obama. To the contrary, the president has had a steady, solid, firm support for democracy, for democratic institutions in the region, and I think that's recognized by people there.
Yeah, and that path is not always going to be a smooth path to democracy. It wasn't in this country, and it won't be in those countries either, as you point out, Senator. On the issue of Israel, you know, the Romney campaign is trying to make a great deal of the fact that President Obama just has not been as supportive of Israel as we should be. Nobody knows that, again, that country and the issues there better than you. What's the reality?
First, United States and Israeli cooperation on security and intelligence is the best that it's ever been. That's from the defense minister of Israel, stated publicly just recently on several occasions, the best it's ever been. Second, U.S. support for Israel is the highest it's ever been. In addition to the amounts that we provide to Israel, substantial amounts as a consequence going back to the Camp David Accords, President Obama has approved substantial increases primarily to assist Israel in deploying its anti-missile regime, which is, of course, the real threat to Israel now. So on what really matters, support, cooperation, it's the best and the highest it's ever been. The principal criticisms of the president made by his opponents are two. First, that he called for a settlement freeze. Well, that was called for by President George W. Bush himself explicitly. He proposed that, so the president simply repeated the same policy. And every American president, every single one, Republican and Democrat, has opposed Israeli settlement policy. That doesn't mean we oppose Israel. We're strong and close friends and allies, and we have an unbreakable commitment to Israel, but we're both mature democracies, and there are issues on which we do disagree. The second issue is the president's statement that the only substantive criticisms are these two, and the second is that in his statement he said that the basis for negotiation should be the 67 lines with agreed swaps. For that, Governor Romney said that the president threw Israel under the bus. Well, in fact, the identical proposal was made by the Prime Minister of Israel just preceding Netanyahu, Prime Minister Olmert, in his negotiations with the Palestinians. Nobody would argue that the Prime Minister of Israel has thrown Israel under the bus, and yet the president's proposal was identical in substance and really almost identical in words to that which had been made by the Israeli Prime Minister. So the only substantive criticisms made of the president are on issues in which he repeated positions taken previously by the Prime Minister of Israel and by President George W. Bush of the United States. It really isn't substantive. The fact of the matter is Israel hasn't had a better friend in the White House than President Obama, and the peace process in the Middle East hasn't had a better friend and supporter in the White House than President Obama.
Senator Mitchell, we are a victim of the clock, a prisoner of the clock, I'm sorry to say. But I just pray and then beg you, Senator, that when this election is over and President Obama wins, that you come down to Washington and sit down with the leaders of the Senate today and remind them how to get things done, Senator. Remind them what a real leader is, and maybe we can get this Senate back on track. Thank you so much, Senator. Great to talk to you.
Thank you, Bill. Right, bye-bye.
All right. George Mitchell. Never been a better leader in the Senate.
That's all for americasdemocrats.org. Thank you to all who made today's show possible. Ben Palumbo, George Bruno, and the entire Bill Press team. And thank you for listening. If you liked what you heard, please get involved in our efforts to keep this show going and to elect Democrats who are bringing the party back to its roots. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. And be sure to find 21st Century Democrats on Facebook. For americasdemocrats.org, I'm your host, Jim Cuddy. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Join us, support the show, and help elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles with your contribution today. Go to americasdemocrats.org